Would you mind just giving me your cell phone for a second? Could I actually keep it? Do you mind? Oh, I can't keep it. All right. Could I have your keys? All right, don't worry about getting them to me right now. And would you take off all your clothes for me? The reason that we don't want to give these things up seems to be because they're private. But today, I want to change everything we think we know about the digital privacy debate. So, having made this film, I've traveled around with it a lot, and I'm like a magnet these days for people who have stories about their privacy having been infringed upon. And I was doing this TV show, and the makeup artist, she went into one of these tales where she was at the airport with her family, and security pulls her whole family aside, and they start questioning them for a very, very long time. And finally it comes out that the reason they were questioning them is because the father had searched for scentless poison on Google. And his wife looks over at her father, and she says, okay, why were you looking for scentless poison? And he says, well, I'm writing a mystery novel. And she's like, well, what do you mean you're writing a mystery novel? She had no idea he was doing this, so security had just basically outed this amateur author. And at the same time, they had done something which I think is a serious violation. They had taken something which was an intimate search, something extraordinarily personal, and they had judged it. They'd taken it completely out of context. And the government doesn't have a sense of humor. And the way in which they were able to do this is partially because of the Patriot Act, but also because of something known as the third-party doctrine. So what is the third-party doctrine? It means that when you give up your information to a third party, to a Google, to a Facebook, to any internet provider that's out there, you've given up your control over that information. And so that's how something like this happened at the airport, which is one of these rare moments where we actually see the surveillance system in play. It's pretty rare that we actually see it happen. And that's because good surveillance happens invisibly. And we now know, of course, that the surveillance system is far worse than we had ever imagined. There's an NSA data center in the middle of Utah. They had to invent some kind of new byte just to be able to describe how much of our data they are storing, sifting through. It is an unbelievable feat. And of course, we now also know, thanks to Edward Snowden, just how massive the whole thing really was. It was so much worse than we ever possibly believed. And there are an estimated 450,000 people with the same security clearance level that Edward Snowden had. And Edward Snowden could sift through anything that he wanted. It's frightening, right? I think it's frightening. And all of this has led to this much bigger question. And it's something I hear a lot, which is privacy dead? The reason there's a unicorn up there is because I don't think it is. But is privacy dead? I hear this a lot. In fact, there was an entire hour-long TED radio program dedicated to pretty much trying to answer this question. I'll give you a hint. It didn't end well. And the thing that the host kept saying, he kept asking this question, should we just surrender? I heard him say surrender over and over again. I was driving the car. Should we just surrender our privacy? Like, is that the trade that we have to make at this point? Is that what we have to give up in order to use all these awesome technologies that help us connect and communicate? Is that what we've got to do? And I was in the car hearing this, and I was just like screaming to myself, like, no! I wanted to jump through and be able to, now I guess I'm on a stage, so I'm getting a chance. But, I was just like a crazy person in my car, because I had spent, the last 3 years of my life arguing why privacy matters so much. But then I thought about it. And I started to question, does it matter? I mean, is privacy really that important? Is it really that big of a deal? Like, maybe I had something wrong. Or maybe there was something deeper that I was missing. Like, maybe privacy wasn't the top-level issue. And then I thought back on what had just happened in the car. When I was acting like a crazy person, the reason I was able to do that, I was by myself and I was having a private moment. But there was something else. And in that moment, everything I thought I knew about the privacy debate completely shifted. You see, we don't have a privacy problem. What we have is an ownership problem. So I want you to think of something that you own. Just take a moment to think of something that you own. Okay, how many of you thought of your house? A few of you thought of your house. Okay, how many of you thought of your car? A fair number of you thought of your car, probably because I was just talking about a car. So this is my first car. It's not exactly my first car. I found this searching through Disconnect on Google, but it looks really close to my first car. And the awesome thing about having a first car, I mean, you know what you do in a car, especially when you're a teenager. You can experience things in a private space, but you don't have privacy just because. You have privacy because you own the space. You have the key. There is a space within which you can have privacy. So when I asked you for your cell phone before, and I asked you for your keys, and it took a little bit of time to get them out, and when I asked you to take off your clothes, these are all things which are not about privacy alone. They are because you own them. You own your phone. You own your keys. And you own your body. So privacy exists within ownership. Ownership is the bigger thing. Ownership is what we should be talking about when we talk about privacy. Because you can't just ask for privacy on property that you don't own. I mean, you can try. You can ask your parents for privacy. It doesn't mean they're going to respect it. You can ask your roommates for privacy. It doesn't mean they're going to respect it. And when you own property, the whole thing changes. You see, then suddenly you can't just have your stuff sifted through at any point in time. The government has to come to you, typically with a warrant. And it works exactly the same way in the digital world as it does in the physical world. So let's pretend for a second that Mark Zuckerberg was your landlord. He's a very busy guy, but let's pretend. So you just moved into your new Facebook household. And inside of this house, you might bring your photos, your furniture. You might have friends over, right? Throw a party. And the thing is, at any point in time, Mark can just come through, rifle through all your stuff, read your journal. He can set up cameras, record everything that's going on in there. That's how it looks right now. Worse than that, though, is that if you wanted to leave this home, you couldn't take all your stuff with you because you don't own any of it. They say you own some of it, and you can take a little bit of it, but you can't take everything. So you're kind of held in a hostage situation. But it's worse than that still. You see, because if somebody else has the key, then you're never going to have privacy at all. And because Mark Zuckerberg had a key, he could come and go as he pleased. And that's how everything works online right now, virtually. All of these services that are out there, have a key. And if some other company has the key, then the company can access the information, the government can access the information, and we're done. So there are a lot of companies out there, though, that are providing privacy-related tools. And they're called, they often, you hear this phrase a lot, privacy by design. But I think the reason people aren't flocking to these things is because we're having a conversation about the wrong thing. They should be ownership by design. And I think people really get it. Like, they really understand the idea of property. Like, we know what property means. We know that it's what defines you. It's what separates you from me. It's how we define boundaries. And it is within the spaces of property where we can have control, where we can explore, where we can discover, and of course, where we can have privacy. So when I asked you to think of something that you owned before, how many of you thought of yourself? One of you, maybe two. I think the reason why we don't think of ourselves when I ask that question is because it's so obvious, right? Like, of course we own ourselves. Like, there's nothing more natural. It's the first thing that we probably own, right? But in the digital world, we don't own ourselves at all. We don't own ourselves. It's crazy, but we just simply don't. We sign these terms and conditions agreements, and the companies suck up all this information about us, thousands of data points, and it builds this giant digital profile, the digital self. This is a reflection of you. It's more personal than most things you do in your life. This is an incredibly intimate and revealing portrait of you, and you do not own it. It's crazy. And because you don't have property of self, you don't have privacy. You can't. So I want to leave you with a story. While I was shooting the film, I went to this cyber surveillance conference. And there's vendors there. They're selling these wares so you can spy on people in kind of terrifying ways. And the guy in this photo, he was selling a product that allows you to extract all the information off of a cell phone. So you can get everything that's on a cell phone. You just connect it and boom. Tons of categories you couldn't even possibly imagine are on there. And so I asked him, I said, would you let me put your phone through the ringer? He said, I've got nothing to hide. So he let me. And I attach it, data dump later. All the categories appear, and one of the categories was what you typed the most into your phone. What he had typed into his phone hundreds of times was Charlie Sheen. More than anything else. The second thing was 2.5 Men. And the only person out there who might actually want to know that that's happening is probably Charlie Sheen. But I can tell you that he was incredibly embarrassed. You know, his face got all red. And why? Why did this cell phone extraction man have a red face? And it's because, of course, he had something to hide. And it's because he had let me invade his property. We cannot have privacy until we reclaim property of self. We simply can't have it. And there's nothing more human, more natural than owning yourself, physical or digital. And the cool thing is right now, the tools are out there to help us start reclaiming this property. You know, these ownership by design tools. So I think when we have the conversation about privacy in the future, let's change it to what we really mean, that we need ownership. Thank you.